Happy Friday and welcome to another episode of BrainScratch. I'm John Lordan. Thank you so much for joining me here today as we look into another mystery, one that has some elements that might remind you of a case that we've covered in recent months, the case of Amber Spradlin. You might remember the story of a young woman who was out after work with some friends, wound up at the home of a prominent dentist and business owner, and she was killed there. Now, we don't know if the dentist is the person responsible because there was multiple people in the house, but there is a question of, is money and influence playing some part in slowing down the justice in that case? In today's case, the victim is the person with the money and the social influence, a prominent neurologist, and it's in his home. We have a similar challenge in terms of it happening within four walls. That's making this case kind of tough. But here we are coming up on a year later with this case, and we also haven't seen much movement in terms of arrests, charges being filed, anything like that. So I think it's time that we dive into this case together, take a look at all the facts that we can find, and hopefully stir up some new conversation as this case now comes up against the 1 year mark. Of course, we're going to start by learning where this is taking place. Detroit, Michigan. Detroit is the most populous city in the U.S. state of Michigan. It has a population of over 639,000 people as of the 2020 census. The metro area is home to 4.3 million people, second largest in the Midwest after the Chicago metropolitan area, and the 14th largest in the U.S. It is a significant cultural center. It's known for its contributions to music, art, architecture, design, and of course, its historic automotive background. Let's start getting into the details over at their local Channel 7 ABC affiliate, WXYZ. Police investigating shooting death of local neurosurgeon. This is Dr. Devon Hoover. Detroit police are investigating the death of a 53-year-old neurosurgeon. They found the body of Dr. Devon Hoover at a home on West Boston Boulevard near Woodward Avenue while conducting a wellness check. Hoover had been fatally shot. Apparently, he was supposed to travel home to see his family. His family is in Indiana. He didn't make it, and they called law enforcement and asked for this wellness check, and that's how they made the discovery. He completed medical training at Indiana University School of Medicine before doing his residency at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. He completed fellowships at Louisiana State University School of Medicine and Children's Hospital of Michigan. Ascension, that is the hospital where he was working at, released the following statement. Devon Hoover, MD, was a dedicated and well-respected member of the Ascension, Michigan family and will be greatly missed by our community. Our sincerest condolences and heartfelt prayers are with his family, friends, and fellow associates during this incredibly difficult time. And I just want to say that, I've looked into many cases, but the community outcry around this case is substantial. I think there's a bit of a differentiating factor here because this is a doctor that is performing very intricate work that is really affecting people's lives greatly. Like several of these stories are, I wouldn't be walking today if it wasn't for Dr. Hoover. So I think there's just a difference when you're dealing with someone that is helping so many other people. And, we have a case that admittedly we're going to learn the details that have been released. And there's some challenges in terms of this case that I think are going to be pretty clear to all of us. But this is someone that was very caring, a big part of his local community. His neighbors all knew him. He has this amazing mansion that is basically his own private museum. He's been restoring it one room at a time. He's buying special pieces for each of those rooms, but not just for him to enjoy. He invites his neighbors in, local community organizations that he's interested in helping. They do fundraisers there. This is a man that was really well seated in this community and helpful. And quite honestly, I haven't seen any critical comments about him. I do just want to mention it as a possibility. I don't think we're going to find any information that really points in this direction. But when you are dealing with medical professionals, and especially someone that might be doing a surgery like, this is the type of doctor you might go to, like if you needed a spinal column fusion or something along those lines. Is there a possibility that this could be related to something with a patient? Like, there was a procedure that maybe didn't go as the patient was expecting or something along those lines. I don't think we can completely rule it out, but I can tell you that the overwhelming messaging coming around the loss of Dr. Hoover is just about how caring, the type of person that would just always go the extra mile. I saw one story about a patient who mentioned right after surgery that she needed a Coke, and he literally walked to the vending machine, bought a Coke for her, brought it back, and gave it to her. Just that type of personality. So I don't know if this is going to be one of those cases where we find out it's some type of, disgruntled patient situation. I don't think it's going to look like that by the end of the review, but let's go ahead and go through more articles and learn more about this. I do want to highlight, of course, we're talking about mansions in Detroit, and that is in a particular area, Woodward and Boston. This is kind of the intersection where his home is. And of course, we don't want to, they've been showing his house. We are going to see pictures of his house, but I don't want to drive in too far to where we can give away the address or anything like that. But it's in this Boston Edison Historic District. The Boston Edison Historic District is a neighborhood located in Detroit. It consists of over 900 homes. It's one of the largest residential historic districts in the nation. So once again, just knowing his love for restoring his home, there's a good reason for it. This is in a residential historic neighborhood. I think there's probably some laws he has to follow in regards to that, but people that decide to live in these areas and have the means certainly take on that challenge. I think they appreciate that challenge and to preserve the integrity of that history. The district was designated a Michigan State Historic Site in 1973 and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1975. A substantial number of prominent Detroiters have lived in that neighborhood. A lot of sports figures, political figures, entertainment people, things of that nature. The homes are owned by people from diverse occupations and professions. So it is apparently a wonderful neighborhood, usually known as a quiet, safe neighborhood. We're going to learn also kind of has its own security service. And this is the very beautiful house that he was living in. I've seen some varying reports on the size, but somewhere around 13,000 square feet. Very large home, 4.5 baths, I think, at least 7 bedrooms. Hoover's Boston Edison neighborhood is famous for its sprawling historic homes. Wayne County records show that Hoover purchased his own enviable address in 2007 for $750,000, according to the Detroit News. That was back in 2007. So that house easily over $1 million at this point, maybe even more. Neighbor Jonathan Sherrod said that Hoover lived alone, but he kept the property immaculate. He's an anchor of the block, extremely involved in the neighborhood, he recalled, noting that Hoover completed his dream greenhouse project just the year before. He's just a wonderful person. One anonymous woman who knew the doctor told Click on Detroit, "This is so insane. I hate when it comes to this." And this is just to show an example of the immediate impact that it has on this neighborhood in April of 2023. Devon has been in this area for a very long time, and a lot of people know Devon as he's hosted so many things for people to come by. This should happen to no one who was just minding their own, as this guy was a worker bee. People loved Devon. Dr. Hoover was well respected by his colleagues and was even featured in Our Detroit's magazine's 2008 Top Docs rankings. So someone also known and appreciated for his career as well. And honestly, just do a search on his name. You will find just endless stories about how he helped change people's lives. People have been offering their condolences on Facebook. We have a quote here from one person: "A loving son and brother, a brilliant, accomplished surgeon, an unrivaled collector and caretaker of all things beautiful, and a champion of art and culture. But perhaps most admirably, he was beyond generous with his time and his treasure. He was one of the first neighbors to take me under their wing, offering old house advice, support, and kindness all along the way," neighbor Patty Lynch wrote. Hospitality was certainly his specialty, as he never hesitated to open his spectacular home to countless neighbors, friends, and charitable organizations. For a man small in stature, he was indeed larger than life. Interesting note on the small in stature, and essentially his body would be moved after the murder, and it just raises that question right off the bat about, okay, carrying around someone, moving them upstairs or something along those lines. You have to be pretty strong to do that, or possibly there's even more than one person involved there. Hearing he's small in stature, this isn't a missing persons case, so I haven't bumped into any stats about his height and weight or anything like that, but just kind of guesstimating based on pictures that I've seen him with family. I think he's probably around average height, somewhere in the 5'7" to 5'9" range, something like that. But interesting note there just about him being small in stature, because him being moved is one of those factors with this case that just grabs your consideration when you get to those details. Hoover was found wrapped in a sheet in the attic of his home with a single gunshot wound. Now, I'm saying that with a giant caveat here. Remember, as we go through these articles, I'm pretty much going through them in order of how they came out. And this is being reported just a day or two after the discovery of his body. So this is early on information. At this point, they're saying he's wrapped in a sheet, which, by the way, some articles are saying is a plastic sheet. Also, big caveat on that. I don't believe that's accurate. Single gunshot wound, not entirely accurate, but I just want to kind of re-represent the flow of information for you guys. Police also said his car was found dumped in a separate location. There was no information about a suspect or any other details released by police. And honestly, that's a trend that holds pretty strong. Police do start talking at one point just a little bit about this case, even asking for some particular help. But outside of that, they really are not releasing much in terms of details on this case. Thankfully, there are some news agencies that file Freedom of Information Act requests, talk to inside sources, and we do get some more information about what's going on here. Over at DetroitNews.com, homicide investigators are interviewing acquaintances to determine why someone would fatally shoot him, cocoon his body in a blanket, and cram it in the upstairs crawl space of the large house where he lived alone. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. Now it's been revealed that his death may have been the result of a domestic incident that turned ugly, according to CBS News Detroit. And I tried to chase that down. I went to the original article over at CBS News Detroit, and that's literally all they say. They don't cite their source. They don't even say it's an inside source. There's no information to really tell you how that conclusion has come about. But apparently that's what's being talked about in terms of the investigation, the result of some form of domestic incident. No motive has been revealed, and police are tight-lipped about the circumstantial details as well as the number of times he was shot. So there we at least start getting some indicator that maybe that note about the single gunshot, not entirely accurate. Now, I know we touched on it briefly about living in this area. We have someone that is a realtor that also has a home in that area that actually wrote an article about how safe it is to live there. So I just want to touch on that because there's also the possibility that, I mean, look, we're talking about someone that is the type of person to have public events in his home. Could it be that someone came to one of those events, noticed something that they wanted in particular? Remember, his home is practically a museum as well. So I think the possibility that robbery could be some form of motive in this, not entirely out of the question. So I do want to learn just a little bit more about how safe is this neighborhood. And over here at realtyinthed.com, we come to understand a bit more about that. Most frequent asked questions I get about living in Boston, Edison, Detroit. Is the neighborhood safe? The answer is a very emphatic yes. Why is it safe? She cites three primary sources. The first, she says the Nextdoor app, but I think it even goes beyond that. I've also run into so many articles from different neighbors of his, everyone talking about how helpful he is, but also some that are leaning into being mindful of each other, watching out for each other. And that's really what she's saying here. The neighbors really look out for one another. And I think that there's something about this being a historic neighborhood like this, that there's a bit of a pride of ownership. I mean, you know, of course, I look out for my neighbors' homes, and I know they do the same for me. But I think there's also this point of realizing that, hey, There's art in these homes that could be worth hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even more. So I think neighbors looking out for each other in this area is probably at a bit of a different level than you would experience in some neighborhoods. But also, they do have a private security patrol. So they have a private security team known as Dusing Security, and that's DSS Security. They're a private security company in place to patrol specifically the Boston Edison neighborhood. And they patrol the neighborhood in well-recognized red trucks, and they're tied directly to the homeowner security systems. Bottom line is, if our alarm goes off, the police have been dispatched, and the DSS security truck is on the way. And that raises an interesting consideration with this case as well, knowing that he has put so much into this house, and we're actually going to hear a quote from one of his friends. He does have a very good security system installed in this house. Why wasn't that triggered in terms of what was happening? I don't know. It just raises the question, is this truly a domestic dispute? Was this something where it was someone that was welcome in the home, the alarms were disarmed? I don't know, in that type of house where you might have panic buttons, the accessibilities of those. Are you going to have one of those in every room in that house? I don't know the scope of all that. But the type of home that would certainly have a security system, it does have a security system. But on top of that, that system is tied into this additional security company and would also notify police automatically. One thing about security systems, sometimes you will have glass break sensors that are on your windows and things like that. Gunshot happening within the home, if the system was armed, I would think has a possibility of setting off one of those glass break sensors. But if this is a case where the person was invited to the home, the system was disarmed, that's probably not going to go off in that case. And the final reason she notes is the Detroit Police Department. She says that now that people are actually paying their taxes in Detroit, the public services are operating efficiently again. In fact, I believe the average reaction time for the police to show up on a call is under 10 minutes. That rivals even the suburbs. 10 minutes, still quite a bit of time, especially if you're in an emergency. But of course, they've got that additional layer of the private company there as well. Now, what about his car? This is a really interesting aspect of this case to me. Essentially, all that's released is that his car was found dumped on the city's west side. And I don't know what that means in terms of using the phrase dumped. There is no intersection that's been given out. I haven't run into any maps that show the location of where the car was located. It's just, I think it's kind of a big part of this story. And I'm curious why law enforcement wouldn't push that information out. Almost 80% of the articles that we're going to look at today are literally happening most of them within the first week of this case. And I'm curious why they wouldn't have released that, because if you're hoping that you might have some tipsters that call in information, we don't even know what type of car, but get the type, get the make, model, color, and get the location where it was found. Because that's going to help that local area say, oh, you know what? That's right across from my house. Oh, I did see something weird. None of that information is being released, and I don't exactly understand why. Also, is that information helpful to the investigation? If this is some type of case where it was a significant other of some kind, is that car all of a sudden winding up close to their house or within walking distance of their house? We don't know. But I'm very curious why the information about the car was not pushed out in an effort to kind of elicit more tips on it. And I'm especially curious about it now that, we're coming up on a year and no arrest, no charges with this case. Over at clickondetroit.com, as crime scene investigators returned to the scene Wednesday, family, neighbors, and patients were reacting to the murder. So essentially, it looks like they sent out additional CSI a few days after the discovery. Hoover's family shared a statement. We, the family of Devon Hoover, wish to express our profound sadness at the loss of a beloved son, brother, and uncle. We grieve his untimely death and will miss him greatly. We're so grateful for the many words of kindness and stories from people who were touched by his life. He was a gift from God and used his talents to bless many. We have another quote here from a former patient. Here's a picture. She insisted on taking a picture with the doctor. She loved the guy that much. Have you ever noticed when people die, all these people say wonderful things and it's not always true? With Dr. Hoover, I was reading all the stuff online and it is true, said his former patient, Cheryl Lever. He was just so fabulous and modest. She said that Hoover helped her walk again through performing spinal fusion surgery. So we have a picture of the state police forensic lab at the location here. This might be from when they went back out on that Wednesday. Police have identified a person of interest in the death of a Detroit neurosurgeon, according to sources. This being reported just a few days, we're talking 3-4 days after the discovery. There have not been any official charges or arrests yet. Sources say that there was no forced entry into his home. Police sources say the operating theory is that Hoover knew his attacker. This is one of those cases that the early coverage, like there's so many things that happen very rapidly in that first week, it really looks like this thing is going to be solved. But of course, you guys know that here we are a year later and we're talking about it. So obviously it isn't. Over at CBS News, person of interest in custody. So they identify and they pull this person in. Detroit Police Chief James White said that the family alerted police on Sunday that something might be wrong. So we're backtracking the story a little bit back to police first getting involved here. I just wanted to include this because we get so little information from them. A member of the family called because he did not show up at an event that he was expected to show up at. When the officers arrived on the scene, they were quickly concerned about some of the things that they saw. And as a result, they went into the home. Little bit of a hint in that statement as well, because, they wouldn't be able to just go into the house unless they saw something suspicious. And knowing that his body would be found upstairs in the attic, essentially, it makes me wonder if the actual crime scene where the shooting happened might be maybe in the lower level. Maybe there was something they were able to see through a window. Maybe there was something wrong outside. I haven't seen any, mentions of, like, there's no forced entry, so we can't say that there would be a window that was broken or something like that. Something that they saw upon arriving essentially gave them the okay to go into the house, and that's how they made the discovery. Back to the chief's quote. Preliminarily, our investigation reveals that this is an incident where the two parties knew each other. Even though one person is in custody, police are still searching for information and asking the public for any information that they may have. So we do get the person in custody, not exactly on charges for this case, though. Over at Detroit News, detectives are questioning a person of interest. A man was taken into police custody just after midnight Friday. So keep in mind, this is, day 5, 6 of this event. And investigators have continued to interrogate him into the afternoon, Police Chief James White said. We're actively questioning the person of interest, and we're confident he knows something. We believe the victim and the killer knew each other. This is not random, and the community is not at risk. There's a family that's grieving, however, and I'd like to extend my condolences to them. Hoover's funeral is scheduled for Sunday at the Cathedral of the Most Blessed Sacrament in Detroit. So Friday, they pull this guy in. They're interrogating him all through the night into Saturday, and literally the day following that is going to be the funeral. And like I was alluding to, an important distinction to be made is that the person is in custody on an unrelated warrant. Police aren't calling the man taken into custody a suspect yet. And here at Click on Detroit, Mara McDonald asked Chief White, "Are you comfortable characterizing the nature of the relationship at this time?" His response, "I am not comfortable doing that at this point. I think that it would be irresponsible for me to do that until I know a little bit more information. Right now, though, we're happy to have a person of interest who we could question. We are confident as a police agency that this person knows something about what occurred." So very strong words very early on in this. And if dealing with a loss of this nature isn't hard enough on this family, 4 days later, Devon Hoover's mom, who was in hospice care, rumored to be dead days after his murder. His mother would also pass away. We have some quotes here. Yes, it is his mom. She was in hospice. Dr. Hoover did say his last goodbye to her, and now they are together. So horrible for this family. That came from Pamela Caramagno, a coworker who worked with Dr. Hoover for the last 4 years. We have some other notes down here. Yes, this is correct. She had cancer and was not doing well for quite some time, said Sarah Zimmerman. And another person named Carol Gove, who is a pretty close friend of his. I've seen her interviewed as well. She said true, and that Dr. Hoover was her best friend. So just terrible things for this family to be dealing with. And then on top of all that, like if this isn't enough, this week, like I can't believe how the events of this week are unfolding. Leading up to his funeral, police investigating break-in at the home of slain Detroit neurosurgeon Devon Hoover. That break-in happening literally the night rolling into his funeral, Saturday night. Police say the suspect entered through a rear window of his home late Saturday night, going into Sunday morning. At this time, it's unclear what was taken. Family and friends gathered Sunday afternoon to say their final goodbyes to Devon Hoover at his funeral. It is unbelievable to think of how this week is unfolding. But this break-in at the house kind of throws my mind in a bizarre direction, because we have an important consideration here. The police are saying that they know this person of interest knows something. They're not saying that it's a suspect. But then we have a break-in at the house. Now, I've heard some people theorize that that might have to do with some form of evidence being removed from the home. Well, if the police do have the suspect, if that's the suspect that they're interrogating, when were they released? Because we know that he was picked up Friday night, and this is happening Saturday night. Is he still in custody at this point? I went looking for those answers, and I believe he actually is. Over at CBS News, Detroit police say a person of interest in the murder of a prominent Detroit neurosurgeon has been released. But here's the post where they say it, and that post is actually May 2nd. We can confirm that the person of interest taken into custody on April 28th has been discharged following prosecutorial review. Homicide and personnel will continue to investigate the information in its possession and follow up on any leads it receives. I've seen other articles as well that are confirming basically they were able to keep this guy on a 72-hour hold. They ran that all the way through and then let him go. I'm also seeing notes that whatever the original warrant was that they were able to bring him in on, that for some reason they couldn't press that charge any further. I don't know if those charges have been completely dropped, but that's probably why they wound up letting him go a few days later. But even if he was in custody for 48 hours, that would have taken him out of the possibility of doing this. So once again, just kind of drawing back, and it's weird because the messaging that is coming from law enforcement on this isn't necessarily that there might be multiple people involved. It's strong and it's direct that they believe that it's a male. They believe that the body's moved, was taken upstairs. Was there potentially more than one person involved is just a question I can't quite shake. I'm not finding anything to support it directly, but especially considering the body being moved and considering this break-in that happens while a person of interest is in custody, could there be more going on here? Outside of all that is a possibility that maybe this break-in is not related to his murder. Maybe there's something else at play there. Someone that knows the neighborhood or saw the news story thought that they could get in there. Maybe it's a robbery of some kind, but we don't have details to really back that up either. The only note that we have, which I've seen in several articles, is police saying, we don't know if anything was taken. We don't know if anything was taken. And that's about it. So it's strange because if it is related to the case, we're not really seeing anything to support that directly. And it kind of throws a question in terms of, is there more than one person involved? If there is one person involved, are the police looking in the right direction? Do they have the right person? Because it wasn't him that broke in that night. Sources told Local 4 that the doctor was not shot in the attic crawl space, but police believe the killer is male, someone known to Hoover, and that there was no forced entry into his home. Officials say whoever shot the doctor moved his body to the attic himself. And this article also notes that the person of interest, the other charges, did not materialize, and the police could not hold him for more than 72 hours, like I mentioned. The Wayne County Prosecutor's Office wants more work done on the investigation before any arrest warrant is approved. We are told the person of interest that was let go is still the focus of the investigation. So once again, just leaving that question for me, but maybe the break-in has nothing to do with it. I don't know. If so, then we might have another crime that was pulled on the doctor's home after his murder. I don't know. It just sounds weird. Details from the autopsy. Beloved Detroit neurosurgeon Devon Hoover was shot twice in the head before he was dragged face down into a crawl space of his home and covered with a comforter, sheet, and a rug, according to an autopsy report obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. Hoover was first shot behind his right ear and then shot in the back of his head. He was found wearing only a black sock. I believe that was on his right foot. Fingernail clippings and samples were taken from Hoover's body for a rape kit, according to the autopsy. So possibly a sexual assault being part of this component, being a component in this crime as well. The person of interest was released, and since then there have been no updates from police, who have been asking the community to provide tips. Other details that kind of come out with that autopsy: he was shot first above and behind his right ear, but with that particular shot, there's no evidence of close range fire. So it would seem that the initial shot happening from a distance of some kind. The second gunshot was to the back of his head, and there was a partial muzzle imprint on the inferior edge of this wound. So literally a gunshot from a distance probably took him to the ground, I think face down, and then he walked up and put the muzzle basically to the back of his head and fired a second shot. There were also abrasions that indicated Hoover's face was down, with the left side of his face against a surface for at least one of the gunshot wounds. His body was dragged in prone position after his death to the crawl space in his home. So he's dragged face down to the crawl space. That's interesting. The note about being dragged might be how they're assuming it was done by one person, because you would think that if there was two people, one person would grab the legs, the other would grab the arms, and he wouldn't have to be dragged necessarily. So that is probably how they're coming to that conclusion, that there was one person. Of course, with these kind of details and police coming out now, talking about rape kits, saying that they think it was a male, a question starts spinning up on social media: was Dr. Devon Hoover gay? The thing that I don't love about this part of the topic coming up in a case that we know so little about is what usually follows this type of statement is some type of assumption about promiscuity because they're gay. Oh, like he's finding random people and bringing them home or something like that. I think it's an unfair assumption that happens kind of rolling on the heels of that. Is there a chance that he was gay? Certainly. This is a guy in his 50s. I haven't run into any information about him being married, having a long-term girlfriend, nothing quite like that. There's a very good chance that he is indeed gay. Does it help this case in any particular way to understand that? Outside of the possibility that this is basically what police are telling us, some form of a domestic dispute. I just don't know. I don't know how helpful it is, but it is a point of conversation around this case. I do want to just mention that I did run into some notes that he was raised a Mennonite, and we have a picture of his family here. Only son in a family of 7 children, the rest, of course, all sisters. He had a wide circle of friends, but was also close to his family, who he was reportedly going to see in Indiana the weekend that he died. He's the 4th of 7 children, and his sisters and he grew up on their family's dairy farm in Elkhart, Indiana. As much as he loved milking cows and harvesting crops, he dreamt of becoming a doctor at an early age. I'm not familiar with the Mennonite religion. I did do some searches, and it seems that fairly recently, the official stance of Mennonite Church USA is that homosexual activity is a sin, and that marriage is between a man and a woman. This is from NPR, but this is also from 2015. I did find another article that's a bit more recent from 2022, which is saying that basically the same church, the Mennonite Church of USA, has changed its view on that very radically. One of the largest Mennonite denominations in the country is making one thing clear: the LGBT community is welcome. Among the changes, pastors will be allowed to perform same-sex marriages, and the denomination has committed to forming an LGBT constituency group. The Mennonite Church also apologized for harm caused by its past policies. I just wanted to run that through because that's kind of where I see the conversations with this aspect go. It doesn't really change anything if he decided he wanted to keep this from his family and it's something he couldn't share with his family. That's, something that happens to people of all denominations. People that don't practice religion at all run into that same instance. So it's certainly possible. Does it help us help solve this case? I don't know. Maybe there's something in terms of information that could shake out from a circle within the gay community or something like that. And that's why I'm including this part of the conversation, also in an effort to try to head off, comments from people that are going to try to take us down that same assumption that I think is unfortunate. And look, promiscuity doesn't have to, that's not just a gay thing. So anyway. Fox2Detroit.com reports support for Detroit area medical professionals after 3 killed in past month. Now, this is something where we typically see social media kind of run off with stories like this. Here we're talking about Fox, and they are kind of pulling together 3 stories. It's a bit troubling to know 3 medical professionals being killed within a month in the same city. Like, that's problematic. But these stories kind of have outcomes. Well, 2 of them already have outcomes. This is not some, people in the medical profession are being targeted situation. Dr. Devon Hoover was found shot in the head multiple times inside his Detroit home. Oakland County Health Officer Dr. Calandra Green was found dead inside her Pontiac home, and Patrice Wilson was kidnapped outside of her hospital and later found dead inside her car. What happened in those other cases? Man accepts plea deal in murder of Detroit nurse. In this particular instance, the kidnapper was an ex-boyfriend, someone that she was trying to get away from. The other case, Calandra Green killed, and then her husband effectively ended his own life as well. So those 2 other cases, if anything, they are pointing to a trend of intimate partner violence. And maybe that is a way that these 3 cases are connected. We don't know for certain yet. There is one person that is actually questioning that. Over at the Daily Beast, we're going to hear from a friend of Dr. Hoover's. His best friend, Jordan Medeiros, said that he couldn't think of a person who didn't like Hoover. 2.5 months after Hoover was found murdered, those closest to Hoover are starting to fear the police may have got a key detail about the shocking murder wrong from the jump, that Hoover was shot dead in a domestic incident. Quote, when the police say, they think it was someone he knew, what does that even mean? Medeiros, who knew Hoover for 2 decades and often vacationed with him, told the Daily Beast last week, just because there's no sign of forced entry, just because he willingly opened his door does not mean that it was someone he knew, like it's somebody close to him. I think that's a very fair point. I would think that his security system probably has cameras. As a matter of fact, we're going to hear a touch from law enforcement where they're saying that they do have footage from within his house, or from his house. I don't know if it's from inside or outside. Look, how many homes don't have a camera on their doorbell nowadays? So if it was something that simple, I think the approach from the police would likely be different. We've seen cases of that nature where doorbell footage is literally released. Hey, we're looking for this particular person. We're not seeing that in this case, but back to Medeiros' comments. He gave a statement to police in April, but he's received few updates since. He said he personally pressed police to release more information about the killing, but they told him that they were holding information back so that they could validate witnesses. He doesn't think Hoover's killer knew him at all. If he did, it likely wasn't a close relationship, Medeiros said. Hoover had no known enemies. He was single. He was known throughout the town by patients, caterers, contractors, and scores of other people that he'd interacted with, but he wasn't necessarily close to. Medeiros believes that police insisted Hoover's death was a domestic incident to appease the public and prevent panic. This article also mentions that he did have a home security system. So once again, surprising, but like I was mentioning before, it depends on if there's panic buttons, where they're located, and to his friend's point, someone knocks at your door, you go answer it, the system's already been disarmed at that point. It's a good point that he's raised. Another interesting thing here, a friend and old former neighbor of his mentioned that she'll never forget laughing as Hoover walked his giant mastiff through his old neighborhood, joking that it often appeared that the massive dog was actually walking Hoover. I don't know if this dog is still around. I have seen no other mentions of this dog, but it would be strange to me to think that someone could have attacked him, like in this scenario that his friend is bringing up. Someone pushes their way in through the front door. Where is his dog while that's happening? What's going on with that? We've heard no other aspects about this dog being mentioned. His friend also said that she's eager for an arrest and she's confident in the cop's assessment that Hoover was killed by someone he knew. So this old neighbor is basically countering his friend of a couple decades that says, I don't think it's someone that he was close to. While he's critical of police's comments about the supposedly domestic nature of the crime, Medeiros said he still supports their probe. He wished more money could have been raised to boost the reward, but said cops advised him that a growing reward amount might cause someone to hold out on speaking in hopes that they'd eventually get a bigger amount. There was an initial reward of $1,000. It was offered, I think, by a local television production that did a feature on this. Crime Stoppers would swing in on that, and then the family would swing in on top of that. He's talking about a GoFundMe that the family had run. We'll get to those details, but investigators, what are they looking for? We finally hear a little bit. Investigators searching for gun. According to sources, police have collected evidence including text messages, video from inside the home. Okay, so we do have a clarification that it's inside the home. I'd be really surprised if they didn't have some form of video, at least from doorbells. But if you have a significant home system, you've got cameras outside as well. Also, DNA found inside the home. Those same sources say that the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office has asked Detroit police to gather more evidence in the case. They said that the key piece of evidence prosecutors are waiting for investigators to find is the gun used to kill Hoover. I know it would be helpful to have that, but we've seen many cases go to trial where the weapon is not found. So it would be strange to me that they would be holding off if like essentially demanding that they have that before they prosecute this. Hearing what they have, text messages. So if there was any type of relationship, even to the point of, that kind of assumption I made about promiscuity, there would be some form of communication that had to happen, even if this was just a hookup. So there's digital forensics that are going to be done on this. Can that stuff take time? Yeah, absolutely. Would it take more than a year? I don't think at this point it would, but it depends on the resources of those departments, depends on backlogs with other cases and things like that. It could take more than a year, to be fair. Video from inside the home. That one, like if you're talking a domestic issue and you have video from inside the home that shows who was in the home at that time, and in particular, if you can only prove that there's two people in the house, Dr. Hoover being one of them, how hard would it be to prosecute that case? I'm really, really curious about that. And outside of that, what could the video show? The video, if it is from inside the home, I mean, any basic security system is going to try to cover as much of the main thoroughfares as you could. I would think any stairway is going to have some form of coverage on it. One person dragging a body upstairs? I don't know. And I'm kind of making the assumption, I think, about the stairs. It could be that maybe the shooting did happen upstairs in a different room. So maybe there, but still a hallway. Like there's common thoroughfares that you're going to, if you're going to put these types of systems in your house, you're going to hit those. So if you did have footage of that kind, I don't think you need the gun for the prosecution. So I don't know. It's just kind of strange. Of course, keeping in mind, this is not a named source. This is kind of an insider speaking to this. So we got to take these details with a bit of a grain of salt. But click on Detroit. The reporting has been really good on this case and other cases that we've covered in the past. So dozens canvass Detroit neighborhood. Look, this community is not forgetting him, and they're doing everything they can. This is at the 3-month mark. Basically, the community pulled together, dozens of volunteers, canvassed the neighborhood. They handed out a few hundred flyers, many of them former neighbors and former patients, frustrated that no one has been taken into custody. Those who live nearby are frustrated police did not canvass the neighborhood after his murder. That's kind of curious. I don't know why you wouldn't. I mean, just on the off chances, one person noticing a specific vehicle, and we know that there's a vehicle that's part of this. At a minimum, Dr. Hoover's vehicle leaving the scene. The fact that no one talked to any of the neighbors, no one talked to this community, and that's how you get points of information and connect the dots for this murder, said Brian Douglas. No leads, and the person who committed this crime is still walking around, and this community is still vulnerable. We get to the 4-month mark. There are meetings that are held, the Detroit Board of Police Commissioners meetings. People start going to these meetings and raising their concerns about what's going on with this case. And that's forcing Police Chief James White to comment. He responded to some of these statements saying the case is complex. He's briefed on it daily. He did offer a small update. Quote, "We are very confident we are going to bring this family justice. We are confident that we are aware of circumstances. We are confident in our suspect." Here he's saying suspect. Now, we're not saying the same person that he pulled in for questioning is the suspect, but here he's calling out they've got a suspect. "We just need a bit more time to work with the prosecutor's office, and we have a to-do list, and we're prepared to make an announcement before snow hits the ground. We just have a lot of work to do." So he's saying before winter hits, and this statement coming in August. How does that play out? We have more people complaining about the crime scene being left unsecured. The family of slain Detroit neurosurgeon Devon Hoover has spoken out for the first time, expressing frustration at the seemingly stalled investigation. While saying that they appreciated officers' hard work, his 6 sisters told the Detroit Free Press, "One thing we wish for is regular updates from the detectives, even if they can't give specific details. It would mean a great deal to be reassured the case is continually active and progressing towards an arrest." Meanwhile, a close friend who was the last person to see Dr. Hoover alive accused cops of leaving the crime scene unsecured. Parts of the crime scene were somehow damaged, and officers gave it the okay to be cleaned before suddenly finding evidence at the last minute, said Carol Govs, his close friend. Yeah, it's a common thing that we hear, especially when investigations start slowing down. Certainly the families get less and less contact. And then in October, the mansion goes up for sale, listed for $2.5 million. I haven't run into any updates if it's actually been sold. This article kind of touches on, how is the murder going to affect the sale of this? And basically the realtor doesn't know. He says these things could kind of go either way, and we're not sure with, especially with how the housing market is at that time. November 3rd, another update as we start pushing into winter. Case could get an update soon. Chief James White told the Board of Police Commissioners, so again they have this meeting, that the case was moving forward, and he was hopeful to have an announcement soon. "We are confident we should be able to bring some closure to this family very, very soon." He sounds like he's easing off of winter, and maybe for good reason. 7 months after murder, still no investigation update. DPD stated that they were prepared to have an announcement before snow hits the ground. It's been 7 months since the 53-year-old Detroit surgeon was found fatally shot in his home, and 3 months since that announcement from police was promised. Former federal prosecutor Abed Hammoud said that it's possible Detroit police aren't debriefing anyone to make sure crucial information doesn't leak. He pointed out that police have said the case may be domestic and, quote, that makes it more difficult in the sense that you just can't say X's DNA was in the house. X might be a suspect because if it's an acquaintance, you expect to find the DNA in the house. So it makes it more difficult to investigate and prosecute. For DNA being the sole point of, interesting or compelling evidence, he's certainly right. And we're seeing so many cases where that is a major component, not the sole point maybe. But if that other comment we heard is accurate, where they do have cameras inside the house, if they could, look, if you've got the doors covered, you know who comes in and goes out. And they I would think at a basic, they have to have that. So unless maybe there was more than one person in the house, but I don't know. I'm not understanding the difficulty here. And to be fair, they're saying it's complex, but we're not really being given a clear understanding of that complexity, why it's being so complex. Hamoud also said that work on that list that they have to do, like reviewing electronic evidence, can take months. Certainly, I do think it's the norm for a couple months on something like that. So there is one more touch on this case that we hear kind of from the officials. First of all, Chief White apologizes at some point. I think he said that he was being, he artfully worded, or he was using artful language in terms of talking about by the time snow hits. Family was a bit hurt by that comment because that made them think winter, and they were expecting to hear something by winter. And of course that didn't happen. But we do have prosecutor Kim Worthy making a comment here. Kim Worthy, the Wayne County prosecutor of nearly 20 years, delves into the pressure of her office and the pressures that they face to resolve cases. There's a full interview you can listen to for yourself here about this. In 2023, her office began working on high-profile cases such as the fatal stabbing of Jewish leader Samantha Wool and the murder of Dr. Devon Hoover. Samantha Wool case, someone's been arrested. I believe it's already heading to trial. When asked about the Wool case, Worthy refused to comment. She also said, quote, "I'm not going to talk about that or Dr. Hoover and some of the other cases that have gained a lot of attention. Very hard work has been done and is being done on these cases. Extremely hard work and focus. I just hope when we go into this new year that with the attention on those two cases, that people would tend to focus on other cases." It's kind of an unfortunate quote, I think. Like, I watched the video for myself, like I suggest, like check it out for yourself, guys. And I don't think she's trying to come from a bad place, but look, there's a big distinction between those two cases. One of them, you've got an arrest and you're prosecuting it. The other one, no arrest. Family's asking for help. Friends are rallying, trying to support and raise awareness and keep it raised. To do an interview and then say, I hope that people would tend to focus on other cases, it just probably wasn't the best play. Like, we understand that there's some challenge, some inherent challenge with you guys prosecuting this. I don't want to seem unfair. Like, the pieces that we've strung together for our understanding of this are so basic. Like, we clearly do not have some level of insight where we could look at the prosecutor and say, you should be doing this by now. Like, no way. I get that. But knowing that there's a family out there, just the way that this is phrased is really, really unfortunate. I don't think people should be focusing on other cases. I think if law enforcement doesn't have the pieces to pull this case together at this point, they should be enabling the community, a community that is desperately trying to help them, to do that. It's that simple. And there has to be some method for it. I mean, I feel like a basic of this case has to do with that vehicle. Like, what if someone saw the person that got out of that vehicle? What if there was a business that has a camera that was facing where that vehicle was left and had footage of the person getting out of that vehicle? Now, admittedly, I would think that there would be an investigative measure. Hopefully a detective would have looked for any camera opportunities around where the vehicle was found. But that doesn't take people out of the equation. Like, without that information being put into the public, there's potential witnesses out there that have just been missed. And in particular, if they're not canvassing strongly, which if they didn't canvass that neighborhood, the neighborhood around where the crime happened. Do you think they canvassed around where the vehicle was discovered very strongly? I don't know. It's hard to answer that when you consider that they didn't canvass strongly around the actual crime scene. So I know this case has some bizarre complexity that we haven't come to understand yet. I hope that as we approach, we got a couple weeks still before we hit the 1-year anniversary. We know the news cycles are going to spin up on this case again. I truly hope that law enforcement will take advantage of that spin up of the news cycle and maybe put some pieces out there that can help them effectively. Put some pieces out there that raise the right questions of the community that will maybe get some of those tips coming in that they need, and maybe push this thing across the line with the prosecutor's office for, okay, we're ready for this arrest. Because there's a family out there waiting to have that. So as I mentioned before, Crime Stoppers initially had a reward of $2,500. The family started a GoFundMe to raise an additional $20,000. They did that. We have a quote here from Dr. Hoover's sister, Lila. "You can choose to hide the rest of your life, but we're really begging with you, choose the freedom of walking in the light." Another one of his sisters, Linda, said, "Devon was our only brother. All of us, his sisters, knew that we could count on his calm, stable presence and willingness to give us advice." Longtime friend Kim Clayson said, "If you know anything that might be a piece of this puzzle, think of the piece you could bring to Devon's family, friends, and neighbors. You will be rewarded in not only bringing us peace, but also with a meaningful payment." So, of course, we have the contact details you need down below. You can call 1-800-SPEAK-UP. You can stay anonymous, and that reward is waiting for the person that has the information that can help close this case and bring justice for this family. I wanted to close with a comment from the family here. "We, the family of Dr. Devon A. Hoover, would like to express our incredible gratitude to the entire Detroit community. You've been so supportive during this time of tragic loss. Devon left a gaping hole in our hearts that can never be filled. Many of you told us how kind, attentive, and generous he was. This was not a surprise to us, but it was heartwarming to hear of the extent and scale of Devon's impact. We're also encouraged by all who have advocated for us and for Devon. We are hopeful that those with relevant information will come forward to help bring some closure to this horrific series of events. Some answers would be helpful and healing, and we are grateful for all who are working towards justice in these dark days." Who took this man's life, and how long are they going to be allowed to walk freely? That's the question at this point. I did look at the GoFundMe. It has been closed. It raised over $17,000 and they stopped accepting donations. I think they got the 20 that they were looking for and they decided to end it there. There is a Facebook group. I don't know if this is managed by the family or not. Justice for Dr. Devon Hoover. I will include a link to that in the description box down below. Even if you don't have the answers, you can help this case. Please share this video with any friends, acquaintances, anyone that you know in Michigan. Let's keep the awareness to this case swirling around, and hopefully we can get that tip called in that might move this with the prosecutor's office and wind up in an arrest in this case. A big thank you to all the supporters that help keep us here, always with limited commercials. You guys might notice there's only ever 2 commercials with these videos. It's because of the great supporters that we have. A big thank you to PayPal supporters Larissa Mertschink, Hillary Green, and Brandy Fry. If you'd like to become one of those supporters, please visit LordanArts.com. There you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee like Ann Peters recently did. We really appreciate all of you out there that keep us here helping these families in these very tough situations and letting them know that they're not alone. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you back here again next week on the LordanArts channel.